The palace has crossed a constitutional Rubicon. The Buckingham Palace has initiated the formal process to remove Andrew's style, titles and honours and serve notice to surrender his lease on Royal Lodge. He will be known publicly as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor and is to relocate to a private residence on the King's Sandringham estate, with accommodation funded privately by the monarch. The government was consulted and supports the move. The palace has begun the machinery to strip the style, Prince and HRH and the peerages, the dignities, the Duke of York, the Earl of Inverness, and the preferred mechanism is by royal warrant and letters patent rather than primary legislation. Whatever remains de jure, the de facto position is clear in public life. Notice has been served to surrender the 75-year lease on Royal Lodge. The sticking point was long. The lease's cast iron protections and the optics of a peppercorn rent. He is to move to Sandringham on a private footing. The Public Accounts Committee has written to the Crown Estate and HM Treasury seeking clarity on the lease's value for money. That is a significant constitutional moment because it treats the royal estate arrangements as a public accountability question, not a private family embarrassment. The trigger environment includes renewed attention after Virginia Giuffre's posthumous memoir and the reminder of her death in April 2025. Andrew continues to deny the allegations and settled civil litigation without admission of liability in 2022. The narrative force, however, has been Giuffre's advocacy and the moral pressure that it has created. Her family has said that her memoir has brought down a prince, which of course is entirely true. Stripping a style of prince is rare in the modern era. The choice to use the Crown's prerogative instruments rather than to ask Parliament to legislate preserves two things at once. It avoids setting a statutory template for title removal and heads off a messy Commons debate that could stray into succession and the role of councillors of state. It also places the responsibility squarely on the sovereign, with government concurrence to certify constitutional propriety. The settlement the palace has now struck has got three elements. It provides decisive distance in public symbolism and property. It establishes a private duty of care in housing and welfare, and it is about institutional containment of the problem by keeping decisions within the prerogative instruments rather than opening a legislative Pandora's box. That blend is why this settlement can stick. It satisfies the majority's demand for consequence while limiting collateral constitutional risk. What remains unchanged, however, is the line of succession. There is no move to legislate for the prince's or the former prince's removal from that line. The Councillor of State reality remains what it has been since 2022. In practice, non-working royals are not asked to deputise. The title list exists in law, but operationally Andrew will not act. That's worrying. Beatrice and Eugenie retain their styles. The dukedom's practical inactivity doesn't cascade onto them. These stabilisers matter for institutional continuity. The lease is the perfect storm of reputational and fiscal politics. An expansive grace and favour style arrangement, minimal rent, heavy sunk refurbishment costs, and a tenant at the heart of the most corrosive scandal for the monarchy in a generation. Once the PAC asked questions, the issue stopped. Being a private family row, it became a public money story. The palace couldn't allow Parliament to redefine its role and to establish a remedy. It moved preemptively. For Parliament to be involved would require debates, and they would probably go significantly further than the monarchy would expect. This was a controversy, a scandal that I think has parallels to the abdication crisis, and was as dangerous to the monarchy itself. The statement. I was talking to someone yesterday who said that for people of his generation, he's 31, I think. They don't think about the monarchy, which I find strange. And I pointed out that when I was a child, I had a little toy of the Queen in the back of her Bentley, and I could wheel it around my toy farm and put the sheep in the car. And I thought the Queen rather enjoyed that moment of Dr. Doolittleism. But he didn't have any of these little toys. He said he was brought up on Pokemon, which seems rather sad to me. Pokemon is just bits of cardboard. The statement, the moral dimension that the palace has now acknowledged is clear. The statement explicitly expressed sympathies with victims and survivors of abuse, and that matters. For years, critics asked why there was no clear victim-centred articulation from the top. By naming survivors, the palace finally aligned its tone with the gravity of the case, while still recording Andrew's denials. That duality is the only sustainable public stance for constitutional monarchy. For the king, this is a strategic pruning. It demonstrates standards, protects the crown estate from deeper parliamentary intrusion, and clears the decks before the Christmas Sandringham optics. For the Prime Minister, it is support without spectacle. It's not in Number 10's interest to spend legislative time on titles when the prerogative route exists. And for the opposition and smaller parties, there will be calls to go further, but the core demand has been met. The incentive to push for an act is reduced if the practical effect has already arrived. Entitlement has been the monarchy's soft underbelly across recent decades. The late Queen's authority insulated the institution. That institution is thinner now. Younger Britons are less instinctively monarchical, and scandals harden indifference into hostility. This decision shows a crown capable of self-correction, and whether it shifts younger sentiment is uncertain, but it prevents drift. And the alternative was letting Parliament take charge of royal hygiene. That would have been worse for the crown in the long run. The legal footholds and the legal footnotes that matter for the months ahead, royal warrants and letters patent, will need crisp drafting to avoid unintended doctrinal ripples for styles and dignities of other royals, and the lease surrender terms will be watched closely. Early termination, compensation and remedial works must be explained with care to avoid the impression of a backdoor subsidy. Expect the PAC to press for disclosure. Any ethical appraisal must keep faith with the victims, and Giuffre's death by suicide in Western Australia in April and her family's statement this week frame the public conscience of this affair. Without her testimony and advocacy, none of this institutional movement would have happened. And whatever one thinks about legal standards of proof or civil settlements, the moral weather changed because she spoke again and again. There will be further skirmishes. The residual briefings about Andrew's contacts with Epstein and others will continue to surface. The palace has now created institutional distance so that each new story doesn't require a crown-wide response. Parliamentary committees may yet hold hearings on Crown Estate governance. That would be healthy. The monarchy gains by being seen to meet normal standards of scrutiny where public resources intersect. And the media focus on Sandringham will raise questions about which house, on what terms, and whether Sarah Ferguson joins him. The impression given yesterday was that Sarah Ferguson would be making her own arrangements. The palace will try to keep this strictly private. And what I would propose now is a short, plain English explainer on titles, warrants, and the lease surrender timeline. The Crown Estate to answer the PAC comprehensively and on the record. To reiterate briefly and without theatrics commitment to victims and survivors of the next appropriate engagement. To avoid triumphalism, this is not a victory lap; it's an institutional housekeeping long after a delay. In one sense, the monarchy has acted late. In another, it has finally matched public expectation to constitutional method. The combination of title removal, lease surrender, and private relocation is the cleanest available line. It tells the country two things. First, that status doesn't immunise you from consequence. Second, that the Crown will act to protect its public standing without waiting for Parliament to do it for them. And third, that a modern constitutional monarchy survives scandal not by silence, not by spectacle, but by the steady, visible correction of a firm hand.